It's called the Belarus-Poland migrant crisis, and the EU is faulting Belarus for it. It has decided to widen Belarus sanctions as the row intensifies. But is the EU hyping the crisis against Belarus due to its disagreement with the contested presidential election, which saw Lukashenko regain his presidency? In this edition of The Spotlight, we will look at whether this migrant crisis has its roots at military action that EU countries, along with the US, have taken in different parts of the world, especially in West Asia. First, let's get the latest on this. Jerome Hughes is our correspondent joining us from Brussels. Jerome, welcome. So what is the latest that we have on this? We know that the sanctions were extended by the EU. Tell us about that, and of course the reaction coming from Belarus, if there was any at this point.
That's right, Kaveh. Well, the situation seems to be escalating. There's no doubt about that. I've just been reading an article in one of the so-called mainstream media outlets, the New York Times, and it talks about the fact that the EU has spent billions of euro. This is something we've been saying on Press TV for many years now. The EU is sending billions of euro to countries, say, for example, in Africa, most notably Libya, and also outside of Africa, say, Turkey, to prevent refugees from coming here. So what we're hearing is, the analysts I've been speaking to, they say this smacks of hypocrisy, that we have a situation whereby the EU is criticizing Belarus, but at the same time, look at aid agencies like Oxfam. They describe it as Fortress Europe, in other words, Fortress EU. The EU is doing all in its power to prevent refugees from coming here. And whether you describe this, as morally reprehensible or, the ethics are all wrong, actually, under international law, the EU has an obligation because rich countries have to take in those seeking asylum. But the EU has a policy of pushing back, repelling refugees. You see 15,000 troops in Poland who are trying to prevent refugees from coming here. And so there is a lot of hypocrisy. And also, it has to be pointed out that we have a situation whereby the government in Minsk, let's face it, is friendly with the government in Moscow. And you have this constant provocation. You talked about sanctions, more sanctions on Belarus. And look at what the EU lawmakers have been saying during the debates last week in the European Parliament. Many of them, not the majority, but a sizable number, have been saying that sanctions don't work. Look at the situation in Moscow, in Russia. Look at the situation in Iran, South African countries, South American countries, I should say, and African countries. Sanctions don't work. It hasn't pushed back Iran. It hasn't pushed back Russia. These countries are thriving in their own way. They have other allies in other parts of the world, like China. And so these sanctions against Belarus, certainly, according to the people I've been speaking to, the EU lawmakers, the analysts, they won't work either. Constantly we hear Joseph Borrell, the EU foreign policy chief. He talks about Moscow or Russia having the same size economy as California. And it's this apart from the sanctions, it's this constant putting down these world powers, and it doesn't seem to work. Russia put the first man in space until Elon Musk came along. Russia, the only way the United States could get to the International Space Station was using Russian rockets. 2/3 of the energy being used in the EU comes from Russia, and most of it passes through Belarus. So to try and belittle Russia and, you could say its friendly neighbor Belarus and put in these sanctions, the reality is they just don't seem to work.
Thank you for that. We appreciate that. That's Jerome Hughes from Brussels with the latest on that. Let me introduce our guest for this edition of The Spotlight. We have historian, political analyst, and author Marcus Papadopoulos joining us from London. Also joining us is Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute, George Samioli, who joins us from Budapest. Okay, I'd like to welcome you both. And George Samioli, I'm going to start with you. Quickly, if you can, give us the short version of what you see as transpiring there on the Poland-Belarus border, how you view this migrant crisis, and whether it's being politicized.
Well, unfortunately, it is indeed being politicized. I mean, the European Union is playing quite a slimy game here. I mean, they really don't care too much about these migrants who are already now freezing in this icy winter temperatures. They want to score political points against Belarus. And of course, they're trying to blame Russia for this. And Russia, of course, has nothing whatever to do with this. Look, as I think your correspondent pointed out, the EU has had these problems before. Erdogan in Turkey has something like 3-4 million refugees that he repeatedly threatens to unleash on the EU, and Germany regularly pays him off in order to stop him doing so. There are migrants that are coming from North Africa. You know, when they're in the Mediterranean, they're shipped off to Italy. We have migrants crossing the English Channel. Again, you know, whenever they're apprehended on the English Channel, the British ship them to safety. So what's so special about this case? Why is it that the EU is unable to do anything at all to help? Well, what's so special is they're coming from Belarus, and he wants to score points against Belarus. There's a very simple solution to this, which is pick up a phone, call Lukashenko, and ask him what is his price. I'm pretty sure his price is a lot lower than Erdogan's price. Belarus is a tiny country compared to Turkey, and all he probably wants is sanctions being lifted off Minsk. But the EU, for ideological reasons, isn't prepared to pay that price.
What was Turkey's price, by the way? Do you know?
I think it's something like 3-4 billion euros.
Okay, so Marcus Papadopoulos, let me review with you this EU accusation and see what you think, where the EU has accused Alexander Lukashenko, the Belarusian president, orchestrating the influx of migrants to pressure it to back down over sanctions slapped on the government. Now, Belarus has dismissed that as being absurd. How do you view it?
The tension on the Polish-Belorussian border is not in itself about migrants. After all, America, Britain, the European Union and NATO had no qualms about allowing well over 1 million migrants to enter Europe as a result of Britain, America, NATO and the EU having destabilized both Libya and Syria through having supported terrorists in both countries. No, what we see at the Polish-Belarusian border is geostrategic politics in action, and specifically Russia is the target. Firstly, America and Britain do not wish the union state of Russia and Belarus. Let us remember, Belarus is the historical name of Belarus. They do not want the union state of Russia and Belarus to materialize, whereby Belarus will reunify with Russia. Why? Because in the event of the union state of Russia and Belarus coming into being, Russian national security in Eastern Europe will receive a tremendous boost. Secondly, America and Britain are trying to foment civil unrest in Belarus in the hope that this will assist them in their quest to initiate a coup in Belarus aimed to bring down President Alexander Lukashenko, to wrestle Belarus out of Moscow's orbit and into the West's sphere of influence. And thirdly, NATO, which of course is directed by Washington and London, is looking for a pretext to increase NATO's presence in Eastern Europe, in the Baltic, and of course in the Black Sea region, which of course is an anti-Russia motivation. And as a result of the last few days, what we now see is NATO having its pretext to go ahead in increasing its soldiery and weaponry along the Russian border. As I said at the beginning, this situation on the Polish-Belarusian border has nothing to do with migrants. After all, there are only a few thousand migrants at the Polish-Belarusian border, and yet the Americans, the British, the EU and NATO had no qualms about allowing well over 1 million migrants into Europe a few years ago.
Right. Well, let's see here. First of all, George Samioli, do you agree with the assessment they're made and the analysis they're made by Marcus Papadopoulos?
I do. I think that there is clearly a strategic agenda here. It's been of long standing, which is to topple the government of Lukashenko in Belarus and thereby weaken Russia substantially. Let's keep in mind that the regime change that the Western powers engineered in Ukraine in February of 2014 was a strategic blow to Russia. There's no question. I mean, that having bad relations with a country that is basically kind of a brother nation that is Ukraine was a huge blow to Russia, and losing Belarus would indeed be something that would be strategically catastrophic. And that is why I believe that the EU and the United Kingdom and NATO want to continue to aggravate this crisis at the border and make this into this giant propaganda exercise in demonizing both Russia and Belarus. I mean, how is Russia in any way involved in this? And yet, if you listen to, or rather read the article written by UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss over the weekend, somehow it is all Russia's fault because Russia was supposed to have leaned on Lukashenko and told him what to do, which kind of undermines the whole idea that Belarus and Russia are kind of two separate states. So I think that there's no question that that is the agenda. And of course, as Marcus points out, I mean, we're only talking about a few thousand. So it is fascinating to see why this sudden hysteria about a few thousand when, in 2015, 1 million migrants were absorbed by the EU. And again, why focus there rather than on what's going on, say, in the English Channel? Are they coming from Belarus? Are the migrants that are coming from North Africa and going to Italy? Are they coming from Belarus? So this is all a part of the kind of engineering this hostile alliance against Russia.
Okay, so we have what has been described by you, Marcus Papadopoulos, which the main target appears to be Russia, as you said. But looking at Moscow's reaction is a bit of an eye-opener because from what we understand, Moscow sent nuclear-capable bombers to patrol the Belarusian skies, and nations bordering Belarus, as a result, have voiced alarm because of that. How do you view Russia's reaction militarily here in terms of sending these bombers?
Belarus and the Russian Federation, on paper, are two separate countries. The truth of the matter, however, is that Belarus is de facto a part of the Russian Federation. The Belarusian armed forces are de facto a part of the Western military district of the Russian Federation. However, whilst the chances of a Western coup succeeding in Belarus are negligible, Russia cannot take any chances whatsoever. That is why Russia has learned from its mistakes it made regarding Ukraine at the end of 2013 and the beginning of 2014, when the Kremlin was very, very slow to react to what was clearly a Western orchestrated coup in the making. So in regard to Belarus, that is why the Kremlin has dispatched nuclear bombers to safeguard the borders of Belarus and effectively the borders of the Union state of Russia and Belarus. That is also why the Kremlin has dispatched Russian paratroopers to safeguard the border of Belarus, which of course is also the border of the Union state of Russia and Belarus. Hypothetically speaking, if a Western coup was to succeed in Belarus and Belarus was to be brought into the West's sphere of influence, that would be a catastrophic setback for Russian national security, because what it would mean is that the entire frontier of the Russian Federation in the West, from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, would be enclosed with countries which are in the West's sphere of influence. And we know already that Britain has sent soldiers to Poland to officially speaking, advise the Polish government on how to secure its border. My own personal view is those British soldiers should actually be in Dover, actually safeguarding Britain's border against illegal migration across the English Channel. And also, the British have said that they have 600 paratroopers and SAS soldiers ready to go to Poland if the situation deteriorates on the Belarusian-Polish border.
Okay.
So that is why Russia is taking the situation so very seriously, but also Russia is compelled to because of the union state of Russia and Belarus, which I should act will materialize sooner rather than later.
Okay. Well, we do need to talk about the humanitarian aspect of this, George Zamiali, and the hypocrisy that's involved. At the top of the broadcast or the program, we had our correspondent talk about how what EU says and does is hypocritical because it spends billions to stop these refugees from coming to the EU countries, even though as a rich nation they need to take in some refugees. We can have your reaction on that issue, and also how, for example, the U.S. Stops migrants crossing the border from, for example, Mexico. Never mind the harsh treatment that these migrants receive. So are we sensing here a sense of hypocrisy from the EU and the US also?
Well, yes. It is kind of interesting that the accusations against Belarus that Belarus is to blame for the migrant flow. Well, no one in the United States would ever, at least any respectable person in the United States would try to do that in Mexico. They say, well, in Mexico is to blame for the migrant flow that's quite substantial into the United States. But in terms of the humanitarianism, that's absolutely right. I mean, we have these migrants now sleeping out in the cold. This is now it's middle of November. It is very, very cold. And why is this happening? Well, it's happening because the EU, NATO, the United Kingdom, and the United States want to use this as a massive propaganda campaign against Russia and Belarus, and therefore to show, hey, these are the people we're up against. So we've got a democracy summit that's scheduled for December the 9th and December the 10th, so it's in about 3 weeks' time. And what's going to be on the agenda? Well, the agenda will be the terrible people such as Russia and Belarus, because Iran will be included in that. But that it's part of the ideological mobilization that NATO is continually engaged in. So they really don't care about the plight of these migrants. I think they're quite happy to have this on the news every night, and then they point to, hey, well, who's to blame? Well, it's these terrible people, Putin and Lukashenko, and this is being done, stated explicitly by Western officials, as I say, by the UK Foreign Secretary, who's now, going around mouthing this nonsense day after day.
So let's try to figure out through you, Marcus Papadopoulos, what is going to happen in this situation. One aspect of it, which was interesting, was the fact that the Belarusian President Lukashenko threatened to cut off gas supplies to Europe. And Putin said that he did not approve of that, in so many words. And he said that, I think, he said perhaps Lukashenko said that in a fit of anger. Do you see something like that transpiring? I mean, at this point, the EU has leveled sanctions. It may even go further. How do you see it?
No, I do not see gas supplies being cut off whatsoever. After all, as I said moments ago, Belarus is de facto a part of the Russian Federation, and under no circumstances will the Kremlin allow anything to disrupt the flow of Russian natural gas to Europe. Why? Because in a scenario where the flow of Russian natural gas to Europe is disrupted, the Russian economy would suffer immensely and would suffer immensely overnight. And let us not forget that the West's sanctions on Russia which have been in force for coming up to 8 years now, are very severe. And one of the ways that Russia has managed to mitigate the losses it's sustained is by increasing the flow of Russian natural gas to Europe, but also to China. So undoubtedly, Lukashenko made that comment either in a fit of rage or to provoke the West, but under no circumstances will the Russian natural gas be disrupted in its flow to Europe. No. What we will see is, as a result of the tension on the Polish-Belorussian border, we will see NATO's presence increase in Eastern Europe and in the Baltic and in the Black Sea, and consequently we will see Russia and Belarus's initiative to initiate the reunification of the two countries come into play sooner rather than later. Okay. And the West has actually inadvertently sped up the integration between Belarus and Russia, because Moscow and Minsk clearly understand there is a very serious threat posed to Belarus by NATO and the European Union. And the way that Russia will safeguard its security on its western border, and in fact increase enormously its security on its western border, is by ensuring that Russia and Belarus reunify. And as I keep on saying, that will happen sooner rather than later.
Do you think that a reunification is going to be the outcome here, George Samueli? Is it even required, given the fact that we know Russia does support Belarus in the form and fashion that it has?
Well, that's it. I think that the unification has been an ongoing thing, and de facto they are one country, particularly as Belarus is clearly under threat. And the only thing that saves Belarus is that that Russia has its back. I mean, you know, obviously there are lots of issues that need to be ironed out before they can become one state. But de facto, it is one state, and therefore anyone who tries anything with Belarus knows that they have Russia to deal with. And Russia has made this very clear, that in any attempt at staging a coup in Minsk will be met with force from Moscow. So, yeah, de facto, it is essentially already one state.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, we're fresh out of time. Let me thank our guest, historian, political analyst, and author Marcus Papadopoulos from London. Thank you for your comments. And Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute, George Samueli, spoke to us from Budapest. And we had our correspondent, Jerome Hughes, spoke to us from Brussels. And that does it for this edition of The Spotlight. From Mika Watawa and the entire team, it's goodbye until next time.